What is up, everybody? Welcome to episode 84 of Into the Necrosphere. I am back after a week-long unplanned hiatus, and I say unplanned because for those of you who are counting down the hours, nay the minutes, until last week's episode, unfortunately I had a few things pop up, and not being able to do a full episode for all y'all was completely unavoidable. However, I am back in a big way this week, starting with my guest, returning to the podcast for the fourth time. I believe he's now the most illustrious guest to have featured on the show, Mike Hill of TOMBS. He is also the host of two excellent weekly podcasts, Everything Went Black and Necromaniacs. If you're not a subscriber to both, then get on that shit. Mike was invited onto the show to talk about the brilliant new Netflix documentary, The Sons of Sam. But as is always the way when he's on the show, we ended up going down all sorts of rabbit holes, and you're going to hear us talk about religion, about our two, or the similarities, I would say, in our upbringings. And it actually, at one point, I kind of made the joke and said it feels like it's turned into a mental health podcast. But either way, really fun conversation. Great having him back on the show. And if you are familiar with any of the episodes that he's been on previously, you know it's always a good time when he's on. Before we get to that, however, Perilaxe Occlusion are a duo out of Canada who produce brutal, spacey death metal. I first featured their previous demo on episode 73 of the podcast. They have now signed to Deborah Morty, so congratulations to them first and foremost. They're just about to put out a new demo called Ray Traces of Death, which even though it's being put out by a record label, it's being pitched as a demo, which leads me to believe that they probably had something recorded and done before they signed on the dotted line. Either way, it is good enough for them to enjoy a second ever, or a rare second ever appearance on my demo of the week. Incalculable Thresholds by Perilaxe Occlusion, my demo of the week, and the second band to feature twice on the demo of the week segment, the other being Born Ultra. If you've not yet checked out that last Born Ultra record, then definitely make sure that you do. But congratulations once again to these guys to signing to Deborah Morty. Another band who I should give a shout out to, Blindfolded and Led to the Woods, recently announced that they signed to Prosthetic Records. And you'll remember that I featured them, I think, back in February. And I also questioned why record labels were sitting on their hands when it came to that band. So glad to see that their ample talents have finally been recognized. But Perilaxe Occlusion, the demo is called Ray Traces of Death, and it is well worth checking out. Coming up later on in the show, I'm also going to be talking about some new music. It's been quite a busy week for new releases. I'm going to be talking about the obvious one, Eternal Hails by Darkthrone, and I will also be discussing my candid thoughts on the new Pestilence album. And then if you are plenty brave and you want to stick around after those reviews, I'll be going through some of the latest metal news and headlines and sharing my thoughts candidly on what I read. So outside of that, just a couple of quick housekeeping announcements. If you're new to the podcast, do hit the subscribe button upon whichever format you choose to listen. I just passed 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, so I want to say thank you very much to everybody for hitting the subscribe button there and for all of the support. You know, all of these things just make it that much easier for me to get great guests, and I have got several in the pipeline, including next week's guest, Drew Goth of the band Drew Goth, and then the week after I am hopefully it's in the diary for this coming Wednesday, but it's on tap for me to get Alan Averill of Primordial fame on the podcast. So that's going to be a good time. Also, follow me on social media if you don't yet do so already. I'm on Instagram and Facebook at Into the Necrosphere, and I am on Twitter at iNecrosphere. Also, if you really want to show your love and support for the show, don't bother trying to find a Patreon page, because, as I've said many times before, I'll never come to you with my palms held out saying, please give me some money, but I will make it available to you to go on to the Teespring store and pick yourself out a piece of Into the Necrosphere merchandise. So if you want to represent with a hoodie, a jogger, or a t-shirt, then head over there, pick yourself out something, and tag me on social media if you wear it. And if you do wear it, I might hit you up and drop a little surprise in your post box. On that note, and without much further ado, let's get this fucking show on the road. Well, dude, nice to see you again, man. What's been going on? How's everything with you? I think the last time we spoke was when I did one of your Everything Went Black episodes back in March, I think.
Yeah, it's been a while, man. It's you know, things have definitely improved since then. You know, it's a return to, you know, normal, I guess, in some ways. At the very least, there's plans to go do and see shows. You know, it's a bunch of live events that have been announced. And, you know, with the band, we're doing a tour in the fall, and we just got offered something for the spring of 2022. And, yeah, we have a single coming out in the fall before that tour, so people don't forget that we actually exist. So, you know, it's a bunch of activity going on.
I was about to say, I don't think you guys have any need to fear worrying whether anybody is going to forget that you're around. I mean, I feel like, and I think we did speak about this last time around as well. I feel like the time that people had to spend listening to music, I get the sense there were a couple of discoveries by larger audiences, and I think TOMBS, it definitely feels to me, if I look at I look at the online commentary and I look at, you know, the response anytime I post anything about you guys on you know, any of my social media, I definitely feel like more folks discovered you, maybe because they had the time to actually devote to listening to music, you know, and discover new bands.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, I was half joking when I said that earlier. It's more the fact of that it's been a year plus, actually more than a year, almost 2 years since we wrote all those songs. So as you can imagine, there's, you know, the writing process is continual. So there's a bunch of material that we're kind of sitting on right now.
Yeah.
we decided to release like one song as like a single EP kind of thing with like some covers and like a remix of one of the album tracks. And one of them is like an ambient collaboration with Dwid from Integrity. And it should be fun. It's like one of these kind of like quick, let's get something out just to have something new since we're doing this tour, some limited vinyl release kind of thing, that sort of fun sort of stuff,
Yeah. And this offer that you've been made, I don't, not to kind of put you on the spot of, revealing any state secrets, but is it good? Is it kind of, I guess, is it something that excites you and that you would want to do?
Yeah, actually it is. It's not like some massive tour, but it's a tour that with a band that I've really been looking forward to hitting the road with someday. And I can't obviously, record labels and management and people like that like to hold off on announcing these things. So, it's a year away, but things being what they are, that's how far in advance things are being booked in the States now. I know like in Europe, you have to book things like, we'll get offered a tour. It'll be like next summer or something like that,
Yeah. I was just about to say, how does Lars feel about you playing with Metallica? Well, speaking of the booking, I don't know whether you saw, but you're 100% correct about stuff being booked in Europe right now. I mean, 2022 looks like it's going to be crazy. They announced the Hellfest lineup. And, whoever is responsible for doing that has really decided to double down. I mean, it's Metallica, Guns N' Roses, Nine Inch Nails, they got like every major band on the planet to go and play there. What is quite cool to see is there's a lot of kind of the smaller bands still there as well. So Maguire's on the bill. Who else did I see there? Not small band, but Obituary's on there as well. There's a lot of the underground stuff that they would support anyway is on there. But I definitely think there's like a pent up demand that's coming to the fore now. And I think what's going to be really exciting is to see what the response is like when people actually get to shows. Will you get back to that, heyday of, I don't think you'll get to the heyday of like, thrash, Clash of the Titans, audience insanity. But I think people are going to be excited all the same.
Well, I know here people are definitely excited about just being able to go out and do things socially. I haven't, myself personally, most of my social life revolves around going to see shows. I mean, I don't really hit the sports bars or go to like, bars necessarily. I'll go to like a club and I'll see bands play or do something like go to a horror convention or something, which I actually did. There was a horror convention a few weeks ago I went to out in Pennsylvania. But it's funny to think that is such a huge component of my life, like music and, even on a social level, going out, that's how I connect with people. And that's how I see friends. And that's, everything surrounds going to see live music or performing or, like the last year, the only people I've really seen are like my bandmates and, some miscellaneous other people,
Yeah. Well, it's we've discussed this before. It's like when that component of your life gets taken away, you end up feeling pretty lost. Especially when you're working from home, work becomes, or the office effectively becomes your house. So there's never a disconnect from work. You never have that break anymore. It gets mentally very, very draining. And I have to say, for me, the podcast is one of the things that's kind of helped me stay sane. Because one, it's a way to stay connected to people that I have built a friendship with over the years. You and I aren't going to talk on the phone every other day. But it's a means to kind of, stay talking to people that you get on well with, that you want to stay in contact with. But equally, it's just a kind of a way to sort of get out of the rut of wake up early, now that the gyms are open again, go to the gym, come home, work, one episode of whatever, and then go back, go to bed. Because that, I mean, fucking hell, if you're in your 40s, you can do that for a couple of months, and then you start wondering, all right, how much longer until the end? How much of my life am I wasting here?
That thought's crossed my mind quite a bit, man. You think about, you hit a certain point of your life and you kind of like see the dim shore on the other end of the rainbow, you know what I mean? And you're like, wow, I don't really have time to like fuck around like this. It's like,
no.
and you get real anxious. And I know that especially in the beginning of the pandemic, when literally nothing was open, it was very, very heavy. I mean, relationship ended. I'm living here by myself. It's like very, very intense kind of vibe. I mean, luckily my job remained. So I was able to work, but it was like, the work was like, it was just literally nothing else to do. And I would try to work out on my own. But that's good, but it could have been worse, but it wasn't great. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I don't feel inspired to work out when I'm by myself. I have to be in the gym, even though the gym that I go to now is, the most straight-laced, boring conventional gym on the face of the earth. I don't talk to anybody when I'm there. I've got my headphones on. As soon as I come in, I get my head down and I do what I need to do. But if I'm not somewhere where there's other people doing the same thing that I'm doing, as far as training is concerned, I cannot do it. But what's life on the mean streets of New Jersey like at the moment?
Well, my streets aren't very mean, man. I live in a really quiet, safe suburban neighborhood now, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, that's as soon as the mafia moved in, they decided to keep things under control in the neighborhood. Crimes happen outside the neighborhood.
I mean, where I live, there's trees. There's like a nice, like the greenway where like families walk with their kids and their dogs and everything, and it's like one of these very, very left-leaning suburban New Jersey towns. We're right close to a university here. So it's not, and the beauty of it is that it's not a university town. It's one of the towns that, say, for example, if you are a professor at the university, you might live in this town. Yeah. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of like progressive people, like, not a whole lot of, like once you get out into the suburbs, it gets kind of right wing in some ways, and I've managed to avoid that by selecting this place to live. And it's pretty cool. I mean, the streets are, it's nice and clean. There's like cool restaurants. There's a Whole Foods here, like that kind of stuff.
Have they opened up things now the way that they're doing over here?
Yeah. Everything's open. Masks are optional, and what I do is I keep my mask with me, and it's like when I go into a place and people wearing masks, I wear my mask. You know what I mean? I'm not one of these, like, I got to force my way in and assert myself in that way. That's not, if I respect other people, it's like, especially if you're working there, you're doing a shift at a restaurant or a grocery store, a coffee shop, and you have a mask on, by all means, I'll put mine on. I don't have to roll in there like John Wayne, and try to say.
Well, roll in as soon as you get in, rip the mask off.
Yeah.
Deep breaths.
That's definitely not my style.
Walking around. Have you had the vaccine yet?
I have both doses, so I'm fully vaccinated too right now.
Yeah. No, mine had to be moved, unfortunately, and it was through various circumstances. But I've got mine lined up, so at some point I'll get it done. I've got my plans to go to South Africa for 5 weeks at the end of the year, still intact. So I don't want, if there's vaccine passports or whatever the case may be, I don't want anything fucking around with me being able to chill out for 5 weeks. So,
well, that's primarily why I got vaccinated. I mean, for me personally, I don't want to set a bad example, but I was just trying to say that I wasn't too concerned about getting sick necessarily. I'm doing it mainly to be able to travel, to be able to be legitimate in a lot of ways. Because I don't recommend this for anyone else, but this is what I did because I'm here by myself, and I figured I don't have anyone to account to. So we kind of trained in secret at the Muay Thai gym. So it was like me and about 20 other guys. We get together every night and train and hit pads and spar, and with no masks. And I got tested every 2 weeks. No one at the gym got sick. I didn't get sick. I didn't test positive once. And that was through the entire, I would say, from like the end of July until now. And so, I mean, if I didn't get sick during that, I don't think I would have too much of an issue with COVID. But that's not to say that I'm not one of these anti-science types. I think that for everyone else, if you have a family and you have people that you're responsible for, you should do those responsible things. Just that don't have those things, so I feel comfortable doing that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It worked on my nerves a bit. The amount of, I felt like, vaccines became this just yet another point for people to virtue signal on, and that pissed me off. It's like, as far as I'm concerned, my health is my own business. I'm not running around telling people what I'm going to get, what procedures I'm getting done, whether it's a vaccine or getting a fucking trip to the dentist. But yeah, I mean, I think for the sake of being able to travel around, for the sake of being able to live my life as close to normal as possible, I don't mind. They can inject away. Part of the reason that I wanted us to talk, aside from catching up, is I'd watched. I literally messaged you straight after I finished the last episode. I'd watched the Sons of Sam documentary, and I was fucking blown away. And then I thought to myself, I know who else will be interested in this shit. Turns out that you dug into it yourself. I have to say, first and foremost, the Son of Sam murders. I've always been very interested in serial killers anyway. The Son of Sam murders, for some reason, I'd probably just scratched the surface of what had gone on there, because I didn't know anything about the satanic cult angle. None of that. I hadn't read The Ultimate Evil. So I knew none of that stuff. So for me, I was watching the documentary, and you kind of get to, episode one, they sort of, it's relatively straightforward. It's, the murders are happening, the police are on the case, and then all of a sudden they sort of flip it on you, and it's like, oh my God. It's this whole fucking, crazy, cult conspiracy, which we'll dig into in a second, that's potentially behind this. And as I said, I was blown away. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, I mean, I was a kid. I didn't grow up in New York City, but I grew up in the surrounding areas. So I remember it was on the news every night when I was very young, and it was taking place actually in the Bronx, which is the borough of New York City that was closest to where I grew up. And I remember that being like, oh, that's not far away from here, and at that age, I wasn't really aware of like serial killers or anything. I was just, like watching like the Jetsons and the Flintstones and stuff like that. So it seeped into my consciousness at a very early age, and seeing those images on the television, and David Berkowitz, like his face, just he looked like just some guy that would live around us, like some guy in the community, really. Like he didn't look like some demonic, like he didn't look like Charles Manson, because I remember I'd seen Helter Skelter when I was a young kid as well, and I'm like, that guy looks like the kind of dude that would like have a cult and like murder people, and all that sort of stuff. And Berkowitz just looked like some guy that you'd see at the deli, really.
Yeah.
And so I was aware of it at an early age. And then as I got older, like in the 90s, I started reading up. In the 90s, everyone was into serial killers and, like apocalypse culture and the stuff that Feral House published, and Jim Goad's Answer Me magazine and all that. And then I started really digging into, I read The Ultimate Evil back then too. And I think I actually have like one of the early pressings of that book.
I was about to say, that came out back in 1987, right?
Yeah, I bought it at a used bookstore somewhere in the middle of the country, because I've been touring for a long time, man. So at that young age, I was out there traveling across the states, and I remember, we'd always, back then, actually, it's like before everything was so homogenous in the United States, you'd actually go to different cities and different towns, and there'd be a culture. And somewhere in the middle of the country, we went to a bookstore in some town, and it had all these crazy books in there. And I picked up a used copy of the old hardcover of The Ultimate Evil, which was the one that they showed in the documentary. So with the wolf on the cover and all that.
Yeah.
So I read that. I'd already been exposed to Manson. As I dug deeper into the Berkowitz lore, like if you think about it, all of his writings and all these things very much like have a flavor of the arcane and the macabre. And
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, after a while, I was like, oh, this guy's not. There must be. I believed at that age, at that point, that there was probably a deeper thing going on than just some guy going crazy shooting black-haired women in New York City.
So you mentioned seeing this when you were young. it's interesting how much of an indelible impression stuff like that make on you when you're a little kid. I remember I was about 5 or 6 years old, and we had a pedophile in South Africa who, you know, had kidnapped. It kind of started with these girls going missing, and at the time, which is crazy to think now because of how violent South Africa has become, but at the time, you know, a story like that was still a big deal. There, you know, it was a very, you know, crime in South Africa was, for a period of time, was actually quite low. So when these girls started going missing, it was a very, very big deal, and you saw it on the news all the time. And then eventually they caught this guy, and as they were about to, arrest him, he shot himself. And they never ever found the girls. They got, you know, the parents were so distraught. I think many of the families ended up splitting up because of all the stress. They saw psychics to try and track them down. They did everything they could. They could never ever find them. But I mean, that has stuck with me, you know, to this day. And, you know, part of me wanting to talk to you about this was, you know, I kind of thought to myself, I think you might have been, you know, not only living in New York at the time, but, you know, at least, you know, somewhat conscious of what was going on when you were young, you know, and all of this sort of thing was happening. Was there, how much of a, I guess, how much of a hangover was there from the Son of Sam murders in New York? You know, as you were growing up, was it something that still got brought up, you know, as a topic of conversation? You know, was it still kind of, was it sort of burned into the collective New York consciousness?
Well, not really, because the way the police were playing it off was that it's just this guy, they caught him, end of story. And, you know, yeah, of course, the news sensationalized it a little bit with, you know, all this kind of like macabre, like writings, you know, up from the cracks in the sidewalk and all this like really cool, like, you know, text that he wrote on the walls. But I think that it faded from everyone's mind pretty quickly. I know it did for mine, but that might just be because I was such a young kid and I was like, you know, going to school and playing sports and things like that. But also the overarching vibe in the 80s, though, was there was a lot of this kind of like satanic panic that was going on.
Yeah.
You know, there was stories, you know, amongst us kids, you know, about, oh yeah, we found the dead cat in the woods. There was like 666, you know, like inverted pentagrams and crosses and all that sort of stuff. And that was very much like part of the suburban culture, you know, and even like my friend Mike, who I do Necromaniacs with, you know, he grew up in one of the more like residential parts of Brooklyn. He was like, yeah, of course, there was like this place that we would always find all this like satanic writing and stuff. So, I mean, it was definitely something that was in the consciousness of people in the United States during the 80s. And then we had the Ricky Casso case out on Long Island, which was, you know, just another regular suburban metalhead type dude who murdered this kid and had to do with like LSD. And that guy scared me when I was a kid because they showed him, they're bringing him in and he just looked like a murderer. And he had this like AC/DC t-shirt on. And I have to add that the AC/DC shirt was something I'd never actually seen that particular AC/DC shirt before. It had the devil on it. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. But there was a lot of these things going on in the 80s. And even, you know, for me, playing in the woods and stuff like that, I'd see sketchy stuff like candles. And I just think people were fascinated with that at the time. And myself, at that, you know, I was listening to Black Sabbath and, you know, getting into like heavy metal music, and, you know, Sabbath were like the kings of that whole thing. So at that age, you know what I mean? So there was like this consciousness of dark, evil Satanism. You know, then on the other side, there was also a backlash with all these like evangelical people, you know, proselytizing about, you know, Satan and heavy metal. And that was the world at that period of time.
Yeah. Well, we had that massively in South Africa as well when I was growing up. I mean, there were books about Satanism and about satanic rock music, and we had people coming to our school to talk to us about it. We had police who were so-called occult experts, you know, coming to tell us about all these horrible things they'd seen. And, you know, then they would always flash up on the old, you know, projector where they had those kind of clear sheets that they put down on the you know, on a projector, they would, they'd have like all of the band names they'd found, and it's like AC/DC, Motley Crue, Guns N' Roses, Metallica. The one thing I'll never ever forget is the one guy stood up, who came to talk to us. He used to be a policeman, then he became like a Christian missionary who was supposedly, you know, combating, and he actually, his exact spiel was combating the 666 gangs. And he stood up, and the first thing he said was, everyone, after you've heard me talk today, you're not going to be listening to Guns N' Roses, but God and Moses.
Oh, God. Wow.
I mean, that to me, the thing is, I've always kind of felt an attraction to, you know, sinister shit anyway. Like, I remember, you know, when I was kind of just to the point where I could read properly, you know, I remember picking up a book out of my granddad's shelf, like Mysteries of the Unsolved, you know, and I was reading about, you know, murders and, you know, supposed demon possessions and aliens and stuff like that, and anything I could get my hand on like that, I was interested in, you know, whether it was movies, books, you know, and then the music started coming in as well. I feel like you know, in many ways, the Satanic Panic was like, you know, and I'm pretty interested to know how it was for you, but because I suspect we're quite similar in that regard. That was like, you're giving me a shopping list now. You know, when you say, you know, stay away from AC/DC. Oh, really? Well, maybe their music's pretty good. Merciful Fate, Venom. You know, I looked up all of that stuff thanks to all the preaching and the fucking proselytizing.
Well, definitely, you know, and that's pretty much what I did too. I mean, anything that seemed cool and interesting and underground, because like at that age, I was starting to feel like the outsider vibes, you know, of like not really fitting in too well. And I mean, that's, you know, you always turn to these like more extreme forms of, you know, art and media and things like that, you know. Were you, did you grow up with Christianity? Like, did you have like an upbringing? Yeah, so did I.
So my parents are still highly devout Christians. You know, my mom was the organist at our church. I went to church every Sunday morning and every Sunday night, you know, until I was about 17, 18 years old, you know, until I could legitimately tell my dad I'm not doing it anymore. I used to get so bored when I was at church that I would read the Bible, you know, and it just to kind of pass the time, because I couldn't, you know, whip out a comic book or anything like that, and didn't do that. Because I also, you know, I used to get my ass handed to me if I fucked around at home as well, you know. Fundamentalist, not fundamentalist, but, you know, pretty strict Christian home. You know, the belief of spare the rod and spoil the child was applied as well, which frankly, I mean, I don't really care about. I think I personally think it was probably a good thing in my case. But anyway, but yeah, no, I grew up all around that. You know, they're still, you know, highly devout. I think there are good things to take away from it, you know, certain good things to take away from it. I think that there's Mortis from Marduk actually mentioned this in an interview that I read with him. And I was fascinated by his take on it, considering, you know, he's, you know, music and, you know, Marduk's lyrics and things like that. But he was saying like he felt like as Christianity got, you know, became less and less of an influence and a factor in the community, the vacuum that it created was eventually actually filled with something worse. And I can see his point to a degree. I think, you know, there is a flock mentality amongst a lot of people, and I think they need some sort of crutch. And I think as soon as you remove one crutch, they're just going to replace it with something else.
Yeah. It was so it was a Protestant flavor of Christianity. Yeah. My dad's is a Protestant. My mom was Catholic, or is Catholic, and I grew up with a heavy Roman Catholic vibe. And the thing about Roman Catholics, though, it's like they're probably the least, you know, it's like I would say they're the least restrictive of all Christians, really, in some ways. You know what I mean? Yeah, they got priests who like touch boys and stuff like that. Obviously, that's a problem.
Well, like I said, they're not restrictive.
Yeah, but as far as like that was more like, at least from my angle, it was like we're on Sunday's the day you go to church, right? And then you know we believe in God and all this stuff. And my takeaway though from my when you say Roman Catholics, I think of almost like a pagan sort of fascination with idols and symbols and the ritual of the mass, really. And I think that it's more closer to like the cult of Mithras or whatever, which is like that ancient Roman, like pre-Roman Persian religion that predated Christianity, where it's like there's, I mean, are you familiar with Mithras, like that deity?
Not really. No, I was going to ask you now. Like, can you expand on that?
Well, yeah, there was about 2,000 years before Christianity rose in the Middle East. In Persia, there was a deity called Mithras. There were a lot of, and it found its way into Rome. And there's definitely a concept out there, a theory that was the precursor to Christianity. And it's, there's a bull, and I mean, I'm paraphrasing all, kind of reducing it, but the same way, like where Mithras hunts a bull, like anytime like there's bull imagery and things like that, it's like references to this old religion, this cult of Mithras. And a lot of like secret societies that exist today harken back to that sort of thing. And so my takeaway from Roman Catholics is that was kind of like maybe what they modeled, or maybe Mithras turned into Jesus Christ or something like that. And there's a lot of the, the symbolism, the pagan sort of aspect to it, I think finds its way into, this kind of esoteric vibe, I think finds its way into Roman Catholic religion. But I mean, like my family, they didn't want to wear any of this stuff. Like my grandmother, who came over from Italy, like, the statues and, crosses everywhere, and like Jesus hanging from the cross, blood, and, it was like very like intense imagery. And I think that I still respond to that, really. I mean, I think a lot of that imagery is, the Old Testament stuff is like really interesting to me, as far as like the way I'm interested in other religions and mythology. I think that's interesting too.
Yeah. I side note, just one thing about the Old Testament, it is violent as fuck. I remember reading a story in the book of Samuel about King David trying to win over he was gonna, in order to marry one of King Saul's daughters, he was ordered to go out and kill 100 Philistines and bring their foreskins back to King Saul. And in my ignorance, when I was 7 or 8 years old, I didn't know what foreskin was. So I thought he had to cut the skin off their foreheads. And I sat reading it thinking, why in the fuck what would a king want with that crap? But anyway, like I said, just a side note. But a lot of the stuff, even reading the Bible, I would say even that sort of probably created more of an attraction for me to getting into dark stuff and being interested in things that are sort of off the beaten path, whether it's reading up about Satanism, or whether it's reading up about murderers, witchcraft, anything like that. I'd say some of that potentially, and you've kind of got me thinking about it now that you brought it up as well. I think some of that potentially comes from the imagery that is kind of subconsciously, planted in your mind when you're at church, because you're effectively, being told to eat the body of a, 2,000-year-old, man, deity made flesh, to drink his blood. There's an awful lot of, pretty gory, horrific imagery that goes along with something that is kind of presented as, peaceful and, very, very, very pious and very, very beautiful.
Yeah, and that's you think about that too. That's literal. The ritual of the mass is. I always pronounce this word the wrong way. The transmogrification of the host into flesh. So literally, the Catholics believe that you're eating flesh at mass. So
yeah,
pretty macabre, really.
Yeah, I think so. But so back to the Sons of Sam thing. So. So in The Ultimate Evil, how much of what's in the book actually made it onto the documentary? Because I watched an interview with the director of the documentary, and he said that they really only kind of scratched the surface in the documentary. He said there's so much stuff that Maury had kind of picked out.
Well, because in the Ultimate Evil, like they only really strained out the sections that had to do more with David Berkowitz. Like in that particular book, they go very deeply in the Process Church of Final Judgment, Robert de Grimston, Manson, and David Berkowitz. So it's like you could have a whole documentary just about that book, really, you know. And you know, I mean, kudos to Maury Terry for digging that deeply into all this stuff.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And but I was actually really happy that they mentioned him, because when I think of David Berkowitz, I always think of Maury Terry, because to me he was the guy who, you know, really tied together all this, like these theories about Berkowitz being, you know, an operative in the Process Church and all this, you know, crossover between Manson and that sort of stuff.
I was going to ask you, what was your take on Maury Terry as a character, as a man?
I mean, you know, I'm always very skeptical of a lot of this stuff. As much as I love to read all these things and I want to believe like stuff like this, you know, I'm like Mulder from X-Files. You know, I want to believe in the aliens and Bigfoot and all these things, but there's I don't know. I really, maybe in 1992, I thought that there might be a real connection. So I guess there's two sides to this. You know, it's like part of me, I want to believe that there was a bigger conspiracy, but the reality of it is like maybe, I guess at the end of the day, I just kind of feel like Berkowitz was a guy acting alone, you know, and a lot of these things might have just been a flight of fancy by a guy Maury Terry, who was just too obsessive, you know. And that's the problem when you get like one singular vision investigating something. It becomes like, how much of it is actually you're leading the narrative, you know what I mean? And how, if there was like a well-vetted journalistic effort into exposing these things, I would probably be more likely to believe that. But he's literally the only person who's come forward with this theory, you know. And that's, you know, of course, when I was in my 20s, I'm like, yeah, it's all connected, man, you know, like, but nowadays I kind of get more skeptical of these kinds of things.
Yeah. I found myself admiring him, or admiring his dedication on one hand, because for somebody to get, I mean, like he's like almost like a Alex Jones type character, you know, for somebody to get that focused on, and as you say, that obsessed with this one topic, and get called every name under the sun by his peers, you know, effectively get ostracized from the community that he was once in, you know, effectively, I mean, it really kind of consumed his entire life. You know, his entire life was devoted and dedicated to this one thing. Part of you kind of looks at it and you go, well, to what end? I mean, even if you did have proof, quite a lot of the people along the way that you were connecting to this were, you know, being killed off. So that wouldn't have necessarily made a change. Then the other part of me was kind of thinking to myself, one of the things that I know to be a trademark of a sociopath is that they are able to charm people, you know, extraordinarily well. It's how they, you know, it's kind of how they get away with as much as they do. And I kept thinking to myself, you know, in Maury meeting with Sam Berkowitz, I think he met with him 3 times. Was he being charmed by a sociopath?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, you know, and I you know, it's hard to say, because it's just yeah, like, I'd still get very skeptical about it, really, you know. What almost would, I don't know, you've seen the first season of True Detective, right?
Yeah. Many times.
I think we talked about that. I've watched it.
Fucking brilliant. Yeah.
But you know, they accused Rust Cole of meeting the case, you know what I mean? Believing, like fabricating all these connections and stuff. And I feel like Maury Terry is a true life version of that character in some ways, where I think he came up with this idea and he kind of followed it down into this rabbit hole. And do I think that David Berkowitz was into weird shit? Absolutely, I do. You know, do I think that he was part of like some network of serial murderers that are connected to Robert de Grimston and the Process Church? That seems a little bit more hazy to me, you know. Though I have to say one thing, Robert de Grimston is alive and well, and he lives in Staten Island, which is one of the 5 boroughs of New York City. So there you go. Maybe he did have something to do with it. I don't know. He still lives out here in the East Coast somewhere.
But you know, it kind of goes to them making snuff movies and stuff like that. Then you start applying logic to it. So you go, okay, to what end are you making snuff movies? You know, I don't know if they had some fucking lunatic that was buying it off of them, but I've always thought the whole idea of snuff movies being sold on the black market to the highest bidder sounds like bullshit to me, just straight up. And then the other thing is you go, okay, well, you know, again, applying the skeptic's eye to it. Why did the murder stop as soon as Berkowitz was caught?
Exactly.
I mean, this was New York, so, you know, lots of murders could have taken place and they just never bothered to connect them. But then also, you know, then there's, again, the flip side to it is that, you know, things like the eyewitness, you know, the police sketch artist drawings, you know, that the witnesses were giving to them. I mean, all that stuff seems to sort of fit so well, which then brings you to the question that you just raised. You know, is the narrative leading you, or are you leading the narrative?
Well, the thing with eyewitnesses is that as over the years, they've sort of, everyone's memory of recalling facts is pretty shitty, apparently.
Yeah.
You know, if you're like, what people get so much wrong when they describe something that they've seen, especially under extreme duress, like if your life is being threatened or something like that, or you're in a dangerous situation, your recall of that information is sketchy at best, apparently. You know, or your brain is like your brain's like chunking data at such a rate that you're creating an image of something that might not actually be correct. So that's the eyewitness of accounts and police sketch stuff is like, at least my understanding is that that's not really so much hard evidence these days. So I think that, you know, that's something that's intriguing, but I think that, you know, people have gotten so much wrong that have been eyewitnesses that they kind of discount a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. It's funny you brought up True Detective as well, because it's the first thing that this documentary reminded me of. It's like, this is like a real life True Detective.
Yeah, totally.
Which, by the way, I liked season 3 of that show, but season 2 was atrocious. But what a tragedy that they didn't do more with that Woody Harrelson, Matthew McConaughey combination. I mean, just one more season. Because that first season is such perfect. Just, I mean, I don't know how to describe it other than perfection. It's like, you know, for me, it's Mindhunter, I would say, is on a par. And I was practically doing fucking somersaults when I read that apparently David Fincher is a nose hair away from re-signing to do season 3 with Netflix, because I mean, I've watched season 1 and 2 probably 5-6 times already. It's such a fucking good show, and it would have been a disgrace if they stopped it now.
Yeah, I'm excited about that too. I didn't realize that Fincher committed to doing the 3rd season yet. But when they put it on hold, I was like, "What the fuck, man? This is like one of the best things on TV."
Well, about to say, it's like it's really sort of hitting its stride. You know, especially with, you know, the way that the season 2 ends, you kind of go, okay, well, the, you know, BTK is in it now, and, you know, there's all sorts of stuff happening. I don't think it's been 100% confirmed yet, but apparently Fincher is pretty close to re-signing. His whole push back on doing it originally was, he said that it takes an extraordinary amount of work. Like, people are working 18, 19 hours a day. Apparently the level of commitment to detail, which, if you know anything about the cases as you do, is, you know, they do get it very, very, very close to the real thing. Did you ever read a book by Robert Resler called Whoever Fights Monsters?
Oh, I never even heard of that.
So the Bill Tench character, from my understanding, is actually based on Robert Resler. And Robert Resler is one of the, you know, obviously one of the first people that you know, helped innovate, you know, the science and the idea of criminal profiling, and you know, really kind of took forensic, you know, psychology to a level, you know, theretofore unseen. It was actually him that in the book talks about being charmed by a sociopath when he talks about meeting Charles Manson. And he was saying that, you know, his experience of meeting him was that he was an incredibly funny, you know, incredibly kind of enjoyable person to be around. Like, you know, you meet certain people and it's nice being in their company. whether they're, nice, assholes, whatever the case may be. It's just you enjoy, not assholes, but if you enjoy being in their company because they, somehow your brain is just engaged with what the person's doing. And he said, like, he could very easily understand after having met him that Charlie would be able to wield that degree of influence over people that he did, because he could kind of wrap people around his finger so easily. And it was actually something that he had said to him when they were in conversation as well, where he said, like, I'm 5'3" or however tall he was. I couldn't beat anybody up. From a very young age, I needed to learn to use my brain to get what I wanted.
Yeah, Manson is. I've always been really fascinated with Charles Manson, and even like I said, seeing Helter Skelter at a young age, he was very scary. And then when I started getting into Black Flag, that was one of Raymond Pettybone's muses, was Charles Manson. Like, there were a lot of his artwork and whatever had Manson featured prominently. And then throughout the 90s, when I was falling into all this serial killer stuff, his brand of that was very interesting to me. And I read, a lot of the books that were out there, like Manson in his own words. And, I got the Charles Manson Superstar video, like that long, big interview with him, and, all the music, like all that sort of stuff. And there was a record store nearby where I grew up called Trash American Style. And the owner used to release bootleg recordings of Manson stuff that he recorded in jail. So I have like cassettes of Charles Manson's music, things like that. And he's been very interesting, because of that. He's like three different people, He's like the groovy, like guru sort of guy.
Yeah.
Like the backwoods, like redneck. And then he's like the convict, you know what I mean? So he plays like all three of these personalities. And uses that to appeal, like make an assessment of what that particular person needs. And he chameleons himself into that to mold himself, to manipulate them. Now that idea, just to tie it back to the Ultimate Evil, was like, the idea with the Process Church was that there was three aspects of, Jehovah, Satan, and Lucifer, so in some ways. And there's always been this big debate as to whether or not Manson was a instrument of the Process Church, and how involved they were in the murders and that kind of stuff. And they go into that in the Ultimate Evil. So, I mean, I've often thought about that trilogy of people that Manson is, and kind of connected it to the idea of the Process Church, where everyone's made up of these three distinct archetypes in their personality. Jehovah is like the good guy, like Satan is like the fuck shit up sort of destruction guy, and Lucifer is like the libertine, sensual, sort of aspect. And that allegedly makes up every single person, in the world. So
yeah.
Manson using three, I don't know. It was just like my own personal theory about, I think that it's likely because they were both active in San Francisco at the same time, apparently. So
yeah. I find that whole entire period in history to be incredibly fascinating, because I don't know whether it was because of the backdrop of Vietnam, or the backdrop of all the LSD that people were taking, but I find you had all this crazy shit happening. So you had Manson, you had a number of kind of serial killers in that sort of 1968 to 1978 time period, coming up, and then it seemed to sort of be this decade of just kind of something being a little bit off. You can hear it in the music as well. I mean, even the music that passed for popular, you listen to, when we spoke about Black Sabbath, you listen to a song like White Rabbit by Jefferson Airplane, and it's a relatively, it's a mellow song, but it's a fucking sinister song. There's no doubt about it. It's like seriously sinister. And I feel like with all of the music that came out at that time, even the most popular stuff, there was always something that was kind of slightly edgy to it, And frankly speaking, there was a lot of stuff that came out in the 70s that's not even metal, that's way more edgy in my view than a lot of shit that comes out nowadays. So I find just the whole, everything, sociologically that was going on, everything in the culture that was going on, I just find it all super interesting, because I feel like it was this, there was just, like I said, something was just not quite Quite right. Not a line to the light. There was some sort of dark undercurrent running through Western civilization at the time, and it made for incredibly fascinating stories, and I think incredibly interesting and enduring art.
Yeah, like I think about that period of time too, and I think that might have been like the where the individual might have been put before the group. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In some ways, like being an individual is and following like your path and that sort of stuff was introduced into the consciousness in the 60s. And everything prior to that was like be a team player, have like this like square John like haircut, get a job, go to school, join the military, fight wars, don't talk about all the horrible things you saw in war, and make babies and that kind of thing, and just turn the crank and make the machine move forward. And I think in the 60s, that's when all that stuff got put on its side, turned upside down, and psychedelic drugs became very prominent, and just drug use in general wasn't just something that, and I mean, we could talk about that too. I mean, in the 50s, prior to that, like that drugs were for like people of color and jazz musicians.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It wasn't in white culture. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that was like a huge upheaval, and and like that played a big part, I think, in just the society that we live in today too. The ability to express yourself. I think of having that. Well, our freedom right now is kind of under attack, internally, but what we can say and what we can't say. But back then, it was like sacrifices that some of those people made to be able to express yourself freely. That was like a big precedent.
Yeah. There is a dichotomy as well, though, because I feel like there was a lot more creative freedom at that time than there is now. If you look at movies, for example, and you look at something like The Exorcist and Chinatown, the Godfather trilogy, Apocalypse Now, there was so much innovation and so much interesting stuff happening. And I remember listening to Adam Carolla talking about it once and saying, like, the reason why we're never going to see a golden age of cinema again like that is because the way that it works now is you have 5 people from different investment banks sitting around a table, and they will immediately say to you, Mike, you've written a really interesting script here, but we think what the main character needs is a love interest. Oh, and by the way, maybe that main character of yours, who's Mike Hill from New York, badass Clint Eastwood type, maybe he should be gay. And it's like, it's kind of they will shape through the threat of you losing finance for your project, the project into something that you don't recognize, and that wasn't really happening in the in the old days. There's another book that's well worth reading if you haven't done yet, called Easy Riders and Raging Bulls, and it's about like the 70s. Oh, you've read it?
No, I actually just picked it up like last year, but it's on my bookshelf right now. So I was planning to read it.
It's about like the Hollywood in the 1970s, and just the sort of creative groundswell that was coming up, and as we said, just led to all these incredible movies, the likes of which still endure to this day. And unfortunately, like I said, I maybe I'm more cynical than most, but I said to my girlfriend the other day, I'm at a point now where I'm resigned to the fact that I'm not going to watch almost anything new anymore. Like, there's no TV series coming out that I'm interested in, with the exception of New Mindhunter. There's next to no movies that I see the trailers for that I find remotely interesting. This new Neil Blomkamp thing, I think it's called Demon. That looks pretty good. But other than that, the last movie that I was truly like giddy with excitement to go and watch was Hereditary. And beyond that, there's been nothing.
There's stuff that pops up here and there. It's mostly very, very independent stuff for me. It's in the horror genre usually. I feel like horror, similar to like extreme music, I think, is one of the last bastions of actual freedom that exists right now as far as filmmaking goes.
Yeah. Well, I'd say I'm going to contradict myself. Another movie I was excited about, but it took me a while to get excited for it. When I finished watching it, I was like, this is fucking incredible, was Parasite. But I love South Korean movies. And I think when it comes to horror and when it comes to horrors and thrillers, I think if you had to do like a sort of round for round comparison. There'll be standouts that have come from, the West and come from Hollywood. But I'd say in terms of total volume of great movies that have come out, South Korea in the last 2 decades would mop the floor with every single country on the face of the earth combined, in my opinion. I mean, stuff like Chaser, I Saw the Devil, Parasite, Old Boy, that entire, Vengeance trilogy. There's just so much fucking cool stuff coming out of South Korea. And the thing that I love about them is their movies never follow a Western logic. So the story might start off in kind of one direction, but it will never ever end up where you think it's going to end up. Like they are. I don't know whether you've seen Parasite, but there's parts in Parasite where I fucking laughed harder than I laughed when I saw Anchorman for the first time, and then it suddenly turns into the most, the darkest and most fucking twisted thing you've ever seen at the end of the film.
Oh yeah, definitely. No, it's a fine movie for sure. And a lot of there's even Indonesia. There's a bunch of really great horror films from Indonesia that have come out in the last few years that I really enjoyed, like Satan's Slaves, and some of the names are escape me right now, but that one comes to mind right away because I just watched it again a few days ago.
Did you see Killers? Which is like it's Indonesian. It's a Japanese Indonesian joint venture. It's about these two guys that trade snuff movies on the dark web.
Yeah. I'm that's definitely on the list of something I want to see. I've read about it for sure. Yeah,
it is fucking brilliant. It's one of the most brutal things I've ever watched in my life. Like I had a back when I was swinging, I had a girl over, and it was one of those regrettable visits, and I was keen to get rid of her. So I said, let's sit down and watch a movie. So I put Killers on. There was one scene that she nearly threw up in, and she's like, don't ever show me this again. And I just kept rewinding the scene, and she's like, you don't want me here, do you? I was like, nope.
That's a good move, man. I got to keep that in mind.
I was about to say, just get something fucked up, and then off we'll go. But yeah. No.
Well, I'm actually single now, so I might have to employ that tactic at some point in the next.
So have you been have you been mixing it up? Are you on Tinder and stuff like that?
No, hell no, dude. I don't. I haven't. I've never used those apps ever in my life, man. But I mean, I've been in a relationship for a long time, but like now it's I'm out here on my own. It's all good, but people just now are like open to doing things socially. So I mean, I'm not one of these guys who needs to have a girlfriend. You know what I mean? It's nice, and if it's cool, and if it's like the person is awesome, and but I'm not one of these desperate souls out there who define themselves by like, I got to be connected with somebody all the time. That's not really how I can't really live my life like that.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. I kind of, when I got divorced, I think it was good for me to sort of have 4 years of, there were a lot of things personally that I needed to come to grips with in that time. And I think had I not come to grips with it, I don't think I would have been able to get into a healthy relationship, because clearly the previous one ended because it was unhealthy. And I don't think if I'd had that time, which an awful lot happened there during that period of time. But if I didn't have that time, I don't think I would have ever kind of gotten to a point where I was like, if I am alone for the rest of my life, I'm perfectly happy. If I meet somebody and that person adds enough value to my day-to-day that I want to spend time with them rather than being by myself, then I'd invite that person in. I mean, that's I think why things work quite well with my current girlfriend. It was somebody that I'd actually known for quite a while prior to us actually getting together. But when we finally started talking and things like that, it was like I wanted to be I wanted her to be around me more than I wanted to be alone. And before that, through many other, and I was on the online dating apps, through many other, many adventures on there, I was like, oh, you've been here for an hour or two now. Maybe it's time for you to think about going home.
Yeah. I mean, I guess in some ways the pandemic was good for me in that sense because, and like if I was in Brooklyn going out all the time, seeing shows, like it's very easy to meet women in New York. You know what I mean? It's it's a very social city. There's a lot of women around. There's like more women than men, I think, in New York City. And, everyone's interested in doing cool things. And, it's like, I think that's probably good for me to just put all that stuff on pause for a while I'm sorting all these emotional things out. And then, all this time by yourself, you go inward and you explore what makes you tick. And, so in a way, there's a positive takeaway from being isolated like this.
I completely agree. The turning point for me, and I've spoken about this on the podcast before. Turning point for me was actually bizarrely, and I'm not even as big of a fan of the guy. I think he's a great dude, but he's not a Euro or anything. But it was something I'd read that the Rock had posted when he was talking about training. He was talking about getting up every morning at 3:15 to hit the weights, and how that served as an anchor in his life to kind of keep everything else in check. And I started, it got me thinking, what in my life did I need as an anchor? And eventually I kind of settled on my daughter being my anchor. And I sort of thought, if my daughter is my anchor, then what do I need to do in that dynamic in order to kind of, in order to keep the, sort of make that my priority and, keep that as my anchor. And I, boiled it down to, number one, I need to spend as much quality time with her as I can. Number two, I need to make sure that I take care of myself physically. So, I made sure that I got, went to the gym 5 days a week, stayed in shape. Number three, I need to make sure that I've got something to leave for her when I pass on, or that I can take care of her, that we can do cool stuff together. So I need to kick ass at work. And once I kind of, I had to sort of train my mind to really only think about it every single day in those kind of simple terms. Like, did I do all these things today in exactly the way that I've just outlined it now? I found life became a hell of a lot easier. I had a lot more fun generally in life, because when I met somebody, I could have a good time, not feeling like them being in my life was an essential, or not really feeling like anything. Even money was a massive essential. I was just kind of focused on those things, and as I said, life just became a lot less complicated and a lot easier. But it took a long time, probably a bit too much boozing and all sorts of shit to get to that point. But when I finally did, I mean, that really was kind of the turning point in my life.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I mean, I imagine having a daughter, or a son could be a big focal point, and I know plenty of people actually who, they're out of control for a lot of their lives, and like they have like, a child, and that's like the thing that grounds them, and that's great.
Oh, dude, it's the most insane experience of my entire life. Literally, nothing compares. I was never out of control. I think I had my 30s. I would say I was wayward. I think that's the only way to describe it. I've never been somebody who, I've never taken any drugs in my life. I've never even smoked a cigarette. I've done a lot of drinking, but beyond that, nothing. But I think I was very impulsive, particularly in my 30s, and I as I kind of look back at my life now, I feel like a lot of stuff from my past sort of bubbled up into my 30s and became a real and became a problem in that they compromised my judgment. And I think it took that, I think the time was necessary for me to sort of, get all of that shit out of my system, and get my thinking and get clarity around my thinking in order to be able to kind of move forward in life. I don't know how we've suddenly turned this into a fucking mental health podcast.
Dr. Phil, like it's like a men's group now, men's talk.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, dude, they have this men's group in South Africa called I think it's called Alpha Males, but it's all alpha males for Jesus. So really, beta males for Jesus. Simps for Christ.
There's some group like that, like, and of course it has to do with like, in the United States there's a that MAGA whole Donald Trump world. There's like these men's groups that people sent, like, I've heard about them. Obviously, I don't have any use for something like that, but it's like if you think that this world, that you are somehow disadvantaged by being a white man, then you're a fucking loser, man. Like, you got problems. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The entire universe is geared towards being a white male.
Yeah. Yeah.
You must I mean, hey, look, people have hardships and all that, but it is definitely gamed for your success as opposed to being a person of color or a woman. And I'm not trying to appeal to the woke culture out there. I'm just saying things that I've felt ever since I became aware of these things, like when I was a kid, how easy it is and how all these like bootstrap types, pull themselves up from their bootstraps, are not even aware of some of the benefits they had just simply by being a white male from the middle class, or that kind of thing. So yeah, all these like men's groups of whatever, it's like, to me, are just like a bunch of weaklings who can't get their shit together, really.
I generally think anybody that needs, I mean, this is not me kind of looking down at society, because I get that certain people have different needs, but I do feel like folks that need groups to prop them up and have to be part of some sort of community, whether it's church or otherwise, I think that speaks to the herd mentality of the average person. And I've speaking frankly, I see some of that. I've always seen some of that in the metal scene as well. I've detested. I couldn't, when I was young, I used to fucking hate it. It's antithetical to me to what I take from the music, which for me is self-empowerment, self-determination, and really kind of, you being kind of the master of your own destiny, rather than needing anything like, religion or anything else like that to prop you up. But then again, like I said, I also concede, and when I was younger, I was much more extreme in my thoughts about this sort of thing, but I'd concede that different people need different things. There's lone wolves and there's pack animals, and that's just how it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely maybe after I read the Satanic Bible back in the day, it's definitely been more about like the individual and like being an individual over like a group. And to this day, whenever there's like groups of people or any kind of like organization, I always get uncomfortable with that. Like this actually a lady that I've been actually avoiding asked me if I'd ever been to the Tahuti Lodge in New York, which is the Thelemic temple, for the Crowley, Aleister Crowley's. Mm. And I'm like, no, I'm interested in, Thelema and all that sort of stuff, but I get nervous around groups of people that are trying to like, it's too easy to try to get people try to mind control you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, especially with all this Crowley stuff, which is like people that I know that have been involved in that are just there for like the sex cult aspect of it, and creepy old guys like looking to scam like young impressionable ladies and stuff. So, and that's not to say that the Tahuti Lodge is about that, but that's the vibe I get. And I'm not really, I'd rather not be involved in that kind of thing.
I'd rather never be involved in any group that does the same shit, anything uniform. I didn't go to the army. I respect the military very much, but I didn't go to the army. I don't want to be part of anything where I'm expected to behave or think in a uniform way, whether it's politics, religion, nothing. I'm my own person. I don't want to be around. I don't want to have friends that feel that way either, frankly. I'd rather have people that differ from me, but, where we can have a conversation, have totally opposite opinions, maybe tease each other a little bit about it. But at the end of the day, maybe you have differences of opinions, but the blueprint that kind of operates things under the surface, that's the same. One of the principles being, give people around you space to be themselves and appreciate them for who they are. But like I said, any sort of uniformity, I've always rebelled against that, whether it was at school, church, anything like that. I don't want it to be part of my life.
Yeah, even back in the day when I was like, discovering punk and hardcore, any kind of like, oh yeah, we're straight edge, we're skinheads, we're this, we're that. I didn't want part of any of that stuff, really. It's too much of like a gang mentality or group control, sort of mind control kind of vibe. I was always been opposed to that, even as a kid.
Yeah. Actually, one question I did want to ask you about Sons of Sam, before I forget. Had you been to Untermeyer Park? You reminded me of that when you mentioned the Crowley and the Corralian gang. But had you been to Untermine Park? Have you seen the sites there?
I haven't, though you would assume that I would have gone there since I grew up not too far from there. But no, I never went there. No.
It was fucking nuts to me to see that, though, because it was exactly like one of those, photos they have in the books about Satanism. Like, this is what we found on this mountain somewhere. That was probably the creepiest part of the whole documentary for me. But anyway, so plans for you, as you say, you guys are hopefully going to be going on tour soon. You've got you've got your new single coming out. How's the reset of the podcast gone?
Oh, it's going great, man. It's doing it every week now is cool, and I think a lot of the listeners that we're listening to Metal Matters have migrated over. I hope they enjoy both shows because Fred and Mike have taken over Metal Matters, and it's going great. Between that and the Necromaniacs podcast, which is also a weekly show, we've been able to grind, and put out some what I think is pretty cool content for everybody.
Well, which is the only yours is the only like metal or non I wouldn't say non-serious, but like some of the other podcasts I've started listening to is stuff like Macro Voices and things like that. So like business podcasts, because I feel like I only have a certain amount of time in my day.
Sure.
And I kind of get from your podcast what I need when it comes to entertainment, music, movies, that sort of thing. And equally, I'm not usually interested in listening to what a lot of other not to disparage other podcasts, but what folks on other podcasts have to say. I think you're doing a great job. And I was when you came up with the name Unholy Passion, for one, I'm a fucking massive Sam Hain fan, so
sure.
I already was like, yeah, I know where that's come from. And then I also thought to myself, man, I wonder why I didn't think of that name for this podcast. Wait to the Necrosphere.
Well, yeah, Ralph is also a huge Sam Hain fan, and but also it's like it was cool doing Metal Matters, but it just was there was too much. As much as there was no format on there, it was too restrictive in some ways because it's like for example, I couldn't really have Bambara. I couldn't have have Reed on a metal podcast because like. They're not a metal band, it's like, and I know I've tried to stretch it, but it's like people who are interested in like, Morbid Angel, I don't think really, I mean, maybe they are, but like, it doesn't really fit. Like my interests go way beyond that, and I think that my admiration for Bambara and Reed Bate and that whole group of guys, I wanted to properly, give them some real intention, and I was able to talk to Reed for like 90 minutes or something like that, which is really cool.
Well, that's your approach I find inspiring. I mean, for me it's kind of the same thing, and this is I've said this to you before. I want to be able to do this podcast exactly how I want to do it. No interference from any label. I'll change and I'll tweak and I'll improve and I'll try and make it better as to the best of my abilities. But at the same time, I never want to be told that I have to meet somebody or review some bullshit music that I don't listen to and I don't want to talk about. And likewise, I don't want to talk about stuff that I don't like either, because why would anyone want to hear about that from me? I don't enjoy In Flames. I'm not gonna. How many times am I going to be able to say? And this was my beef when I was writing as well. How many times am I going to be able to say that I think this style of music sucks and doesn't appeal to me? It's like I saw on Blabbermouth once somebody did a review of a Stryper album, and he was running the album down, and I don't like Stryper, but I was thinking to myself, what was the point of this? You say right at the start that you don't like their music. So who on earth is going to read the shit and get any sort of value out of it? If you're a Stryper fan, you want to know whether, by comparison to other Stryper albums, it's a good album. You don't want to go, hey, by the way, I think this band sucks. I'm against Christian rock. And now I'm going to tell you why my opinion has been reinforced after 5 seconds of this album.
Yeah, so. It's just in line with what you're saying too. Like there's definitely, as doing the podcast for like a platform or for a company. I mean, yeah, I got paid, but also I just got a sponsor and everything went black. So it's same money basically. So it's not that big of a difference.
Who's your sponsor?
Portland Distro.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. They're like approached me about doing, doing some ads on the show. So
that's very cool.
All for it,
but, that's awesome.
But like the same thing you're saying basically, where it's like there's bands that are popular. There are bands that, as a journalist, if I wanted to say that, it would make sense for me to have those people on, especially doing the show for another platform. It would make sense to have them as guests. But I only want to talk to people that I enjoy, that I think are interesting. And I don't want to fake it, you know, with other people. Oh, your record's outstanding. Meanwhile, I hate it, you know, and then there's also other people who just get, in my opinion, they get enough press, you know, they I don't need to talk. I don't need to have them on the show because they get enough, you know what I mean? So
yeah, no, I totally agree with you. Well, listen, brother, thank you so much for your time. We're getting closer to that point now where hopefully we can do one of these in person at some point.
Yeah,
but,
man.
You know, I'm going to definitely have to travel for work when the restrictions lift, and a big chunk of that traveling will be to the States. So I hope we're going to see you in person at some point. But either way, let's definitely do one of these again at some point soon. You know, whether I come on your show or you know you come on, yeah. But awesome catching up with you as always, man.
Always a pleasure. And thanks for having me on. And take care, everyone. Talk to you soon.
Take care, brother.
Bye-bye.
Descensum by TOMBS off of their excellent record Under Sullen Skies. I believe it clocked in at number 6 or 7 on my illustrious top 20 of 2020. If you have not yet checked it out, then make sure that you do. Make sure that you familiarize yourself with all of TOMBS' back catalog. And thank you once again to Mike for coming on the show. Great having him on. We will definitely have him on again at some point in the not too distant future. And once the traveling allows, it would be so fucking cool to do something with him in person. I do want to try and figure out a way. I've kind of toyed with the idea of renting a studio. I still think that might be the easiest way to do it. But it may also be cool to be able to take this podcast mobile when we're able to do some more traveling. So I'm going to try and toy with some ideas there and see what I can do. But in the meantime, once again, thank you very much to Mike, and I hope you guys enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. Time now to talk about some new music, and we are going to start with the big release of June, also one of the biggest releases of 2021 probably, at least as far as profile is concerned. Darkthrone have just put out Eternal Hails, and given that this is their 19th record, it begs the question that as an artist, what do you do when you have plumbed the depths of black metal, old school thrash, crust punk, and for one album at least, death metal? In the case of Darkthrone, you go back to the roots and you produce a record that not only reeks of Black Sabbathian doom, but by turns also tips the hat to early Celtic frost. I will admit quite candidly that I didn't have particularly high hopes for Darkthrone's 19th album. Those of you that stick around and listen to my news segment, you will remember that I spoke at length in a profanity-laced tirade about how poor I thought Hate Cloak, the terrible first single of the album, was. I will give you a spoiler. That song has still not grown on me, but we'll get to more of the record later, or in a second, I should say. I would also mention just at the start of this, in the interest of full transparency, I am not one of those Darkthrone fans for whom the big three is the greatest and only valid records in their discography. I do like those very much. But my go-to, I was about to say my go-to Darkthrone records, I hate them and Plague Wielder. They're the ones I go back to most frequently, and they're the ones where, frankly, I enjoy Darkthrone most. And I will also say I have actually enjoyed quite a bit of latter-day Darkthrone output. I think they were really at the peak of their powers in terms of kind of bringing in the crust punk piece and some of that sort of old school thrash on Circle the Wagons. In the run-up to this record, I felt that Old Star, their last album, in spite of the fact that many people enjoyed it, was extraordinarily dull. And I did feel like, or I did question whether they had any creative fuel left in the tank, which Hate Cloak, quite frankly, did nothing to alleviate those fears. But as it turns out, it is by far the weakest track on the record, and there actually are a couple of very enjoyable moments on here. Most notably, the opening tune, His Master's Voice, which kind of starts off with a riff that sounds like it could have been birthed by the vegan mind of Tom G. Warrior. Wake of the Awakened, I think, is another really solid tune. I think what really stands out to me about this is there's this overtly retro atmospheric break that kicks in around the kind of 2.5 minute mark of the track, and it sounds like something off of a 70s horror movie. But I really like it. It's subtle, but at the same time, like I said, it also really elevates the track. That is the good news. The bad news about Eternal Hails is that first and foremost, it sounds like total shit. I mean, the record sounds like it was recorded straight to vinyl in the 1960s. It has this feel. It has a VHS feel. I don't know how else to describe the sound to it, but it sounds like you're listening to a recording straight off of a VHS tape. I think the performances, in particular Fenris's drumming, sound lazy throughout the album. And the reality is that there's very, very little black metal on this record. It still sounds like Darkthrone, but it sounds like Darkthrone maybe, it sounds like Darkthrone around Old Star, which also wasn't a particularly black metal record. And for me, that fact makes comments like Nocturno Culto's recent "black metal has lost its power" nonsense in Revolver magazine really stick in my craw, because when you make comments like that, for starters, in my opinion, you're insulting hundreds, if not thousands, of hardworking artists that are producing challenging, interesting music in the genre, and frankly have blown the doors off the hinges, creatively speaking, in the black metal scene. But the other thing is, in my opinion, it belies the fact that if we're very, very honest, the black metal scene passed Darkthrone by a good 7 or 8 records ago, if not sooner. So, that comment does piss me off just somewhat, and I had to consciously try and have it not color my views of Eternal Hails more than it did. I think ultimately how you feel about Eternal Hails will largely depend on how forgiving you are. Personally, I think there are, interesting and enjoyable moments on the record, as I mentioned. There is an endearing quality to the album, but it is a long way off the masterpiece that some have declared it to be. Interestingly as well, when I posted about it on social media, the variety of opinions that I got was, like I said, was pretty interesting. Some people either really love it, some people, think it's a load of shit. I also would suggest that, folks that are fans of this podcast, probably like me, don't necessarily believe in honoring the sacred cows of the genre. But I will digress and lay a track on you. I mentioned it earlier. This is a song called Wake of the Awakened.
Yearning
That was Wake of the Awakened by Darkthrone off of Eternal Hails, which is available right now on Peaceful Records. If you're interested in checking it out, I will post the link naturally in the description of the podcast. One thing that I elected to mention in my review, I joke a lot about Behemoth and their pathetic Jesus Christ rubbish on their last album. There's a bit on Hate Cloak where I don't know whether it's Nocturno or whether it's Fenris, where just randomly someone is kind of saying in the background, Eternal Hails, which is, it's not entirely as lame as Behemoth, but very, very close. So I just thought I would mention that. But like I said, an endearing record, which is about as sweet and nice as I can be about it. From one legend to another, Pestilence are back with a record called Exitium. Patrick Mameli, I should say, is back. Pestilence, as you knew them on Consuming Impulse, are no more. This is a retooled band, by which I mean every member, barring Patrick, is new to the fold. Patrick has also signed himself up to a new record label in Agonia. And then somehow still managed to make an album that sounds pretty much like the Pestilence that we have come to know and love over the course of the 3 decades plus of their existence. Personally, I don't think that's a bad thing. I really enjoyed their last 2 records, Hey Dion and especially 2013's Obsidio. Obsidio was kind of quirky and weird, but really kind of brutal and nasty at the same time, you know. And I would say that for my money, I think that Exitium can actually top both of those, you know, which is a big statement. I think one of the main reasons for that is the fact that there is a return, albeit a very subtle one, of some of the more avant-garde influences that infamously melted the minds of critics back in 1993 when Spheres came out. But this time round, it feels like Patrick has learned his lesson in the sense that when he deploys those synth lines or those kind of jazzy, discordant bits, you know, he does it in a, as I said, in a very measured way, and he never ever gets away from his strengths, which are breakneck, aggressive, riff-orientated, old-school death metal. If that is your vibe, you are going to absolutely fucking love Exitium. It is sharply produced, wall-to-wall goodness, and at a running time of just under 40 minutes, it never outwears its welcome. I think it is excellent stuff and highly recommended. Here is a track right now, which I have read somebody compare to Septic Flesh. I'm not quite sure about that, but either way, I think it's fucking excellent. This is a song called Deificus. Deificus by Pestilence off a track called, an album called Exitium. It is available right now on Agonia Records. Definitely check it out. Great to see legends that really can still hang with some of the young bucks of the scene, and I personally think Pestilence definitely can. Patrick Mamelli may be a weirdo, but he is an extraordinarily gifted musician, and he's a fucking great vocalist too. So good to see Pestilence back, and I think this is really a superb album. Right, time now for some news. First up on Metal Storm, we read that Violence is to headline the MTV Headbangers Ball Tour in Europe, which is strange because I thought that MTV was no longer a music channel. They were a channel promoting the woke agenda to imbeciles. But either way, whether Headbangers Ball still exists or not, this is a pretty tasty lineup. Violence, Voivod, Exciter, Artillery, so old school goodness there. And man, I have so many great memories of MTV Headbangers Ball, even though I thought that Vanessa Warwick was an absolute imbecile. Some of the stuff that I discovered on there was fucking awesome. And way back when, my parents were too cheap to get us satellite television, so I needed to rely on the goodwill of friends to record it for me. But I remember how excited I used to be when a tape showed up that had some new MTV Headbangers Ball episodes on. They had a segment on called Into the Pit where just a bunch of very, very, very cool stuff, would normally be previewed on. Anyway, let's move on. What is this? Swartelder Inc. Deal with Soul Cellar Records. I believe that Cold have also recently signed to Soul Cellar Records. So this may be a label worth checking out. Soul Cellar Records proudly announces the signing of Norwegian black metal foundation Swartelder. The four-piece is currently working on their new yet untitled studio album, which is scheduled for release in the first part of 2022. I don't know Swartelder. I'll definitely check them out. And Soul Cellar Records, like I said, seem to me like they know what's up. Let's move on. King's X mastering new record. I've never quite understood the hype around King's X. I know that for a lot of people, this is like the band that should have been, as big as Metallica, but kind of never got their due. Me personally, I've yet to understand exactly why that is. We've already spoken about Darkthrone. I am disappointed in that when I first heard Hate Cloak, in my mind I was already starting to put together the jokes about Eternal Hails being more like Eternal Fails. Like I said, not Eternal Fails, but I will say again, Nocturno's comments about the black metal scene really pissed me off. And, shockingly enough, legions of the idiots that follow the band, were kind of quick to agree because, they would agree with anything that Fenris or Nocturno say. But anyways, the news seems to be a little threadbare this week. Another band I don't like, Between the Buried and Me, Withered, entire new record available for listening. So this was actually probably my favorite release of the weekend, but I wanted to spend a little bit of time with it before I did a review. So I'll do a review on this next week. But just so all of y'all know, this is the fourth record that Withered have put out. Withered hailing from Atlanta. The album is called Verloren. It is out on Season of Mist, and it is fucking excellent. So spoiler alert, this is not going to be a negative review when I talk about it next week. It is a fucking fantastic record. Really heavy, really challenging, and very unique sounding. So yeah, really, really liked it. On the other hand, Dee Snider unveils new single, I should say, featuring George Corpsegrinder Fisher. This is the biggest load of shit on the face of the earth. So the album is called Leave a Scar. It's due out on July 30th. He was talking about how, I think the description of this is so fucking lame. Dee Snider says about A Time to Choose. Time to Choose deals with a subject I've addressed often over the course of my writing career. Good versus evil. See, burn in hell. By the way, apologies for my coffee machine making a racket in the background. Given the heaviness of this track, I felt adding George Corpsegrinder Fisher's voice to this would drive home the seriousness of the choices we make. I was honored when he agreed to contribute his incredibly powerful voice. His voice sounds very tacked on. The song sucks. The lyrics are fucking rubbish. It sounds like some fucking do-gooder from the 1980s trying to tell you how to live your life. Just complete muck. Ophidian One share another new single. Ophidian Eye, I should say. Ophidian Eye, of course, featuring the members of Hellfrow, which were on the podcast about 50 or so episodes ago. I had a couple of folks ask me to get them on to talk about Ophidian Eye as well, so I'll definitely do that at some point. This is a good record. Everything I've heard about it so far, or heard off of it so far, it sounds very good. The new single is called Storm Aglow. The album is called Desolate, and it is also being put out by Season of Mist. So I should hopefully be able to get that sorted out, because unlike the infamous fucking simpleton that runs Snapper Music's PR, Katie at Season of Mist actually responds to emails. Domination Campaign, The Sniper's Gaze track premiered online. Newly formed death metal operatives Domination Campaign, featuring psychroptic vocalist Jason Pepiat and drummer Joe Haley, premiere a new track and music video, The Sniper's Gaze. The latter is part of the forthcoming debut album Onward to Glory, due out on July 9th via Prosthetic Records. Joe Haley, of course, the brother of David Haley, of the Amenta and Werewolves fame. But I've heard a couple of snippets off of Domination Campaign. What I've heard so far, very, very good. Definitely feels to me like this year is a much, much better year for death metal than I can recall there being for quite some time. Let's see what else there is to mull through on here. Bokassa Molotov Rocktail studio album announced. I saw Bokassa, I think it was Bokassa, supporting Metallica about 2-3 years ago, and it was fucking dreadful. Dark Funeral complete pre-production phase, entering studio soon. Hooray. Another album. One of the things that I really detest about Dark Funeral, and I've mentioned this before about the typewriter vocals, but I feel with you have it in death metal. When you do it in black metal, it sounds even worse. And for me, in almost every single one of the Dark Funeral albums that I've heard, the vocals always done in the following in the following pattern. It's like it's just so unbelievably shit. My South African countrymen, Volvadina, or Dinia, which sounds, as I've said before, like a venereal disease, have unleashed a brand new single or video, Eternal Wasteland of Galaxies, as part of their forthcoming studio album, Prinuntius Infinity, due out on 17th of September via Unique Leader Records. I think Unique Leader are a very cool record label, and as I said before, well done to Velvedina for signing to them. Is it Velvedina or Velvedinia? I don't know. Octurus releasing exclusive box edition in September. Very underrated band. Very, very cool band. And if you haven't listened to Octurus recently, then do yourself a favor and check out some of those old records, because they are absolutely brilliant. And then final one before I switch over to the Democrats' Guide to Rock Music. Hooded Menace drop new single. Death Doom outfit Hooded Menace will be releasing their new full-length The Tritonus Bell on August 27th via Season of Mist. The four-piece is now sharing the second single, Chime Diabolicus, which can be heard below. Love the name Hooded Menace, and I really like that track, and I'm really looking forward to that album as well. Right, so on now to Blabbermouth and Borovoy's crush. Ted Nugent is naturally splashed about the page. Let's see what there is to say. We've got KK Downing, who didn't believe a word of what he wrote in his first Judas Priest resignation letter. At this point, KK is really like a slighted girlfriend. He's like an ex who was happy to agree to the divorce, but when they realized the real life implications thereof, suddenly they had a change of heart, and it was the husband who was wrong and a scumbag. And not that I'm speaking from personal experience, of course. Paul Stanley on Ace Frehley and Peter Criss requesting final approval of Kiss documentary. That's fantasy. Again, not nary a day goes by where we don't get some sort of update from Paul. Ted Nugent explains his exclusion from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I sit on the NRA board and I'm anti-dope. Anyway, I will say this about the Nuge, and many will disagree with me on this, but I've always thought he's a bit of an imbecile. But when I saw him on the Joe Rogan experience, I did think to myself, he's actually not too bad a guy. Many things that I disagree with him on, but he's not a bad guy, and I did think that he's 2-minute extended rant, which I think you can view separately, probably on multiple channels, about veganism, I thought was pretty spot on. As I mentioned on, I think the episode that aired right before I went on my hiatus, episode 83, Thomas G. Warrior actually blocked me on Facebook for daring to make a joke, post a picture of some steak I was grilling, and say, happy Saturday, vegans. Tim Ripper Owens wins this week's award for stating the fucking bleeding obvious. The pandemic changed everything about everything. Thank you, Einstein. Wolfgang Van Halen. It would be really boring if I was just a carbon copy of my dad. I can tell you right now, if your dad weren't in the picture, you would not be signed. Marilyn Manson reaches agreement to turn himself into police in connection with alleged assault in New Hampshire. Things go from bad to worse for Brian Warner. And like I said before, I would hope to raise my daughter better and smarter than to get in any way mixed up with a fucking douche bagel like Marilyn Manson. Let's see if there's anything else that is worth talking about. Stain's Aaron Lewis to release controversial new single next week. Controversial because I, Borry, have read through it, and I disagree with much of what he says, therefore it's controversial. Less lame than some of the bands that I've mentioned. High on Fire's Matt Pike to release Head on a Pike, the illustrated lyrics of Matt Pike. Rare Bird has announced the release of Matt Pike's Head on a Pike, the illustrated lyrics of Matt Pike. Pike, guitarist, vocalist, and frontman for Grammy Award-winning doom metal band High on Fire, began his career in the Bay Area punk and metal scene in 1989 and has been an active and influential player in bands like Sleep, etc. I fucking love Matt Pike. I love his lyrics, and I love High on Fire, and I like Sleep as well, but High on Fire is my band. I've said many times before, I think part of what I love so much about Matt is the fact that he's one of those rare guitarists where it doesn't sound like he has to practice. It sounds like he picks up the instrument and the music just flows from him, and it is fucking glorious. Sepultura joins what seems to be a trend that's sweeping the old school metal scene, because Gary Holt also recently announced that he was doing this. Sepultura's Andreas Kisser says he has quit drinking. I realized I was a slave to alcohol. I feel like all of these guys that are quitting booze, good for them. Like I said, I know Gary Holt recently did it. I think it's a very brave thing to do, quite honestly. And I think that particularly for folks that, have been doing it for many, many years, you get to a point in your life where me personally, I cannot fucking deal with hangovers anymore. Like the joy of getting drunk is vastly outweighed by how much I fucking hate being hungover. So I can have, I'll have like a glass or two of wine, when I'm having dinner, when I'm having a nice dinner, I should say. I do like, having a glass of wine at the end of the day, but, in terms of, getting fucked up, that's just not for me anymore. So, kudos to these guys. And the other thing is, I think these guys are also starting to see a lot of their, they're seeing a lot of their friends pass away young, develop all sorts of illnesses. Obviously Tom from Exodus, he's recently been diagnosed with cancer, and hopefully he's fighting the good fight and getting through it. But a lot of this, I think, comes from hard living. These dudes go on tour for months on end, and when they wake up in the morning, someone is probably sticking a beer in their hand, and when they go to sleep at night, which is normally very late, they're probably about 15, 20 beers in, and you can only go on doing that for so long. So Billy Sheehan weighs in on David Ellison's sex video scandal. And when I first read this is kind of why I paused a second ago, because my eye caught that headline, reveals whether he would join Megadeth. I almost I thought that it said reveals whether he would join in. But yeah, poor old Dave. Career ruined, all for the sake of a 3-second orgasm. King Diamond says new albums from both Merciful Fate and King Diamond will be ready in 2022. That would be such a fucking cool guest to have on this podcast. And now that I'm 1,000 strong on YouTube, who knows? Yeah, big fan. Satanic Planet featuring Dave Lombardo, Devil in Me music video released. I don't know whether anyone has actually heard this or listened to this yet, but it is fucking abysmal. It sounds exactly like the sort of fucking nonsense you'd imagine a pagan cult who have sex with each other in the woods would be playing in the background. I was, when I first saw it come out, I was like, oh man, this could be pretty interesting and cool, but it is not. It's absolute drivel. Body Count begin work on new album Merciless. I've always liked Ice-T, and I do like the old Ice-T hip hop albums. I've recently, in probably the last year or two, one of the things that I've definitely come to know is that Ice, like many others in the entertainment scene, loves to pontificate about politics, knows very little about politics. And then finally, Fear Factory's Dino Cazares, Demanufacture, is a classic record that stood the test of time. It's one thing I would agree on with Dino, although I will say, as I think I've mentioned on episodes past, I feel like Demanufacture is now starting to show it's showing its age a little bit. I think the production still sounds cool. There's still some very, very cool songs on the record. There's a couple of songs I think that are starting to sound rather shite. And on that note, the news for this week is done. That also brings me to the end of another episode. Thank you very much. If you have stuck around all the way until the very end, you are one of the diehards, and I appreciate your support. I really appreciate everybody's support. Like I've said many times before, there are so many podcasts to listen to, and the fact that you guys tune in and week out to mine, and that the podcast keeps growing and becoming more popular is mind-blowing and humbling at the same time. So thank you so much for your support. I have a blast doing this, and I really hope that all of you have a blast listening to it as well. Next week, I will be talking to Drugoth of the band Drugoth about his new record, Unto the Darkness Sworn. Very interesting conversation. I think it's the best way to describe it. It took a little while for me to warm him up, but when I did, he turned out to be a very cool dude. And then if all goes to plan, the week after, I will have on Alan Averill of Primordial. Really, really looking forward to that. As it stands right now, I am recording this on a Monday morning, and I have got that conversation scheduled for this coming Wednesday. So if it happens, I'll let all of you guys know on the socials that it's in the bank. I thought of a way, or I was thinking of a way, I should say, to respond to Nocturno Culto and his mind-melted moron fans' comments about black metal appropriately, and I thought, what better way than to play one of, in my opinion, the finest black metal albums of the last 5 years, This is Ecclese off of their fantastic record, Melano, available right now on Deborah Morty Records, and this song is called Ephialtes, and it plays us out this week. Thanks once again for checking out the show. Take care of yourselves, and I will see all of you bad motherfuckers next week.